Everyone. Welcome, welcome to the latest of Turnkey's webinars. This topic today is Rise Right, how to avoid FUEing up your S4 licensing. So for those of you that don't already know me, my name's Simon Persson. I'm the Global Head of Consulting here at Turnkey, based out of the UK, but have a much more global reach when I'm looking at the solutions that we offer to the marketplace and how we go about delivering those to our excellent clients. I'm joined here today by Doug Gibson. He's managing partner of Invictus Partners, and he's going to be taking through a lot more of the details as to how we can avoid the pitfalls of the FUE conundrums and what other add-ons that brings. So Doug, rather than me completely destroying the introduction to yourself, would you mind saying a few words about yourself and what you're for?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. It's Doug Gibson, the managing partner in Invictus. So we're an enterprise software advisory firm. We don't sell, we don't implement. We work with clients, helping them around their licensing through optimization, audit defense, and path to cloud. We've done 64 RISE contracts around the world. We've worked with clients that have moved to third-party support instead of going. We've looked at clients that have supported and decided to change platforms, but everything about it is making sure that we protect our clients, getting the right deals, making sure that their contracts are in play and they understand all the rules so they can make sure they've got a good deal moving forward and manage and remain compliant ongoing. So today we're going to focus a little bit more on the RISE stuff around FUEs and how it links with infrastructure.
Fantastic. Thank you, Doug. So yeah, just a few housekeeping checks before we dive into the details. But we do, as per usual, have the chat feature. We have the Q&A feature as well. We're going to try and answer as many of those questions at the end. So please use the chat box, the Q&A features here within the webinar platform, and we will try and get to those at the end. Once Doug gets going, we can't stop him, so we don't want to interrupt the flow of what he's saying by asking him inane questions throughout, although it's quite difficult to shut me up at times as well. So I'll try and wrestle back control at some point as well. As you might be able to tell, Doug is an Australian and he's got roots in South Africa and in the north of England and Teesside as well. So there may well be the odd swear word that comes in. We can't always help that when we get too enthusiastic about the topic. So for anybody who's easily offended, maybe this isn't the webinar for you, but we'll try and keep it as clean as we possibly can throughout. And both of us have got so much energy and enthusiasm that we love to talk fast and get as much information out as possible. We're going to try really hard not to do that because we've got another opportunity on the 1st of December to have a much more in-depth look at this. So this is meant to be an introduction and a summary of the issues, but we've got a lot more opportunity to deep dive later on. But on with the show. Don't think we've got anything else to cover before we crack on with that. So we're going to get into it. What we're going to cover today, the fundamentals really are looking at what's changed with the licensing situation. As Doug's already trailed, there is a bit of a change with the FUE count, so we'll have a look at that, understand what that means, and some of the impacts, not just upon users, but also on the actual overall sizing and infrastructure impacts of the stack. We will dispel some of the myths that there is a little bit more options out there for you rather than just taking what SAP will throw at you. And we're trying to give you the perspective that you've got a little bit more control over your own destiny. So we'll start talking about some of those ways that you can take back control and hopefully start giving yourself a little bit more comfort in what will often be feeling like the hard sell towards whatever the software vendor wants to push towards you. Doug, anything else that I've missed on that before we hand it over to you to get cracking?
No, you've summarized it enough. Yeah, perfect.
Fantastic. So I think we've got about 40 minutes or so of content. So we're trying to get all the words in as quickly as possible and try and make sure that we don't fall short on that. I have no doubt that we will. So all good stuff. And over to you, Doug, to take us through the rest of the presentation.
Great. Thank you, Simon. So just making sure it's picking up. So there we go. Okay. You know, everyone always talks when they talk about SAP, everyone's seen the dates 25, 27, 30. What do they all mean? Everyone's got their own interpretation of what that means. Yes, there are dates, but one of the big things we keep telling our clients as well is make sure that the roadmap is controlled by you, not by the vendor. Whether it's SAP, Oracle, doesn't make any difference. The roadmap needs to be controlled by you, because when the vendor goes off, the sales rep moves on to the next thing, you're the one that has to manage it ongoing as well. So 2025 obviously was the big driver way back, was the initial trigger, but then it became the trigger for Enhancement Pack 5 and below. Then 2027 was for everything else, for Enhancement Pack 6, 7, and 8. And then 2030 was, between 2027 and 2030, was all about extended support. And initially people were like, well, what does that mean? Basically, well, back in 2018, SAP stopped investing in ECC because that was the last release of Enhancement Pack 8, but then it just gets service packs every year. So, but what's interesting about these dates is that depending on where you're at, it drives different behavior. For clients who were getting triggered by 2025, who weren't in a position to potentially adopt a RISE or a new transformation or even a brownfield program, we saw a lot of those clients move to third-party support, right? Because they just said, I need a break and I'm moving to third-party support. And when I'm ready, I might come back, or I might just move straight over to cloud. 2027 is coming up. And what we're seeing is there's two types of messages that's coming through. There's the SAP message, and then there's, I call it the SI message. And the SI message is, there's going to be no resources in the marketplace. If you don't get it done now, there's no resources. You're going to be a deluge of people trying to get it all. And you see it all on LinkedIn, all the lovely adverts of people going crazy and pulling their hair out and everything. Yes and no. And the reason why I'm saying that is because they have a bench that they've got to get utilized, right? They've invested a lot in training people. They need to make sure these people are done, right? But what we are seeing is that a lot more people are going brownfield versus a transformation program. They're doing selected transformation over time. Now is not the time. We are in a global recession, right? We see this we work with clients all over the world. People are tightening their budgets, but they are investing, but they have to do it very selectively, right? So these dates are important, because what if you miss 2027 and you're not there? Say your support fee goes up 3 to 5%. It is what it is, right? But it gives you the time, right? And it's important to understand those dates are there. They're not going to move because SAP can't move them again. They can't move them again. If they move these dates, they've lost all face. So these dates will not move. What might happen is you might go into market-driven support from 2030 and all these sort of things, but you won't, those dates won't move. They can't move, or they'll be crucified in the market. But then one of the things we found, right, is SAP is having a massive program where what we call it is, boy, have I got an offer for you call, right? Every client that they've got, they're getting unsolicited proposals. Boy, have I got a deal for you. These incentives that we have, these transition incentives, they're only here till the end of the year. We can't tell you if they're going to be here anymore, right? So you're hearing all of these wonderful things. The new licensing model, the FUEing model is going to be so simple, because now you can just rebalance your licensing. It's great. Yeah, there are pros and cons to all of these, though. You need to understand what they are, right? But what they're doing is, when they're hitting clients, we get called in by clients saying, this is a great deal. I had a client in Italy recently call me up and said, I've got a fantastic offer from SAP. I'm going, that's wonderful. This is a cloud subscription. Are you ready to do anything? No, we're not ready. So why are you taking it? Right? Get your act together. My grandfather was a carpenter in the Royal Air Force during World War II, and he always used to say, measure twice, cut once. Right? So plan, 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 plan. And then when you're ready, then you can execute it. Because people are going down this path and still thinking in the legacy model of, it's a great deal, I'll take it now. End of year, end of quarter, whatever it is. But it has massive impacts on you, right? Transition incentives are changing. SAP said there's no, at the moment it was only for this year. Transition incentives were always there. They just became a formal program this year, because without them, the business case doesn't stack up, because that kind of funds your support fee in the meantime while you do your transformation program. So there's all these things that come up. So one of the things, this is probably a good time. We've got a poll question that comes up. If you can have a think about it, the first one is, have you or your organization been approached by SAP with an unsolicited proposal? Yes or no, right? And it could be, it's not an order document. It's a, hey, I'd love to take you through this. There's some great incentives we've got in play, or up to a proposal that's saying, we've already looked at your licensing. We reckon it looks like this moving forward. What do you think? Boy, is it a good deal, right? That's number one. But the other poll is also, has SAP asked you to run a STAR report? And I'll explain a little bit more about the STAR report shortly. But have they asked you to run a STAR report? Because that's a very leading one that they do. And we'll talk a bit more about that and what the pros and cons are of a STAR report. So if you can have it, just take 30 seconds to think about that and see what that does for you. Okay, wow.
That's really,
Yeah,
really interesting, Doug. It's pretty much an
yeah,
even split across both of those
yeah,
questions. So far more than I thought have actually
yeah.
received that unsolicited proposal from SAP. And I know that you were saying that there's been a bit of a targeted campaign, and we've seen it as well, particularly around the North America domain. But
Mm.
to see that it's pretty much a 50-50 split is a massive surprise, far more than we thought.
Yeah, no, it is. Yeah, because in the US, we've seen it where it's literally they targeted 1,500 clients of low-hanging fruit clients to go after this year. At the end of October, they only had 38 signed, right? Because people are taking the time now to look at it. These are significant investments. SAP goes, but it's only going to cost you a smidge, like from Meet the Millers, just a smidge, right? But it's not a smidge because that's not the problem. The problem then becomes what's the SI costs that go with it as well. Then all of a sudden, even a brownfield is anywhere between 1 to 20 million pounds, depending on what you're doing, depending on your landscape. Not everything moves to RISE. Some stuff you're still going to keep, most people keeping PI and PO going because that still keeps going for another 3 years until 2027. And I'm not ready to do a full integration strategy with BTP. So you have all of these things coming through. So you've had the core, but now what are we talking about here? Is it jumping to the next one? Sorry. Go through the next. There we go. So what options do you really have? And you have choice. 100% you have choice, right? So do nothing is a choice, right? 100% is do nothing and I'll just wait until I'm ready for it, right? Stay on premise, right? Move to third-party support. Do I move to RISE versus I move to Grow? Now, Grow is really their SaaS offering. RISE is really a managed service offering, right? So it's private cloud. Grow is their SaaS offering. Completely different, right? Grow, you're going definitely greenfield. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. So Grow, unless you're just basically throwing away what you got and doing brand new transfer, and that's more transformational, people aren't doing it. If you look at SAP's results, 60% of their RISE customers are on Grow because they're net new to SAP. Move to a hyperscaler, stay where I am. We've had a lot of clients that are on S4 that SAP is pushing to try and get them to RISE. They're on 1909 and they've got to upgrade and all that stuff. But they're looking at that and go, do they do that or do they move and actually go to RISE? So there are choices that you've got to look at. And each one of those have got pros and cons and they differ by customer because depending on you, do you have your own resource team? Some people have got a very light footprint and they're using SIs to complement through AMS. Others have a very heavy footprint. We've got one that's got 46 people that are trained up and they're going, well, I've got to look after them first and foremost, right? So it changes the way you approach things, but you do have choice. So if we just pick one of them today, we're going to talk about RISE and the FUEs around them. So if we look at that, just to get a quick understanding of how the operating model changes. Okay, so if you look at on the top, this is your on-premise or your perpetual, whether it's ECC or S4, right? This is typically how the breakdown of the operating model works. On the right-hand side, it's typically internal or relying on you and your third parties to do it. Then you'll have SAP will do the maintenance and support, and then you'll typically have internal operations around backups, OS, database management, those sort of areas, and then either your data centers or your hyperscalers. Now, SAP's approach for RISE is that they take over the bulk of it, and then you just still keep with you're still going to need AMS, you're still going to need project co-innovation. But the devil is in the detail. You look under the covers, there's a lot of things in there. For example, they go, oh, we do patching. No, they don't. They patch to the dev environment. You still move it into production. You still need security people. You still need a lot of these things. So understanding roles, responsibilities, SLAs, these are all very, very important things because they all impact your cost of ownership when you move. So this is like when we're always talking government, where they say if a policy is going to get, by the time it gets to the floor of the house, everybody knows about it. The same thing here is when you're having those conversations with SAP, you need to understand all of these because then you're in a position of power in any negotiation that you've got. So it all started, everybody's seen the wedge that SAP promotes. You've got your traditional and then you've got your RISE. But there are so many other things to think about. Operating model changes, contract changes, SLAs, bill of materials, all of these sort of things are changing, right? Now you look at that and you go, oh my God, that's a lot. But here's an example of just some of the things. And I'll dive into a couple today on these ones. But your contract's going to change. Your cost models are going to change. Your SLAs are going to change. For example, things SAP has derivative pricing where on-premise, you don't pay, you pay for your production licensing. DR in the cloud, it's 17% on the net price. So if your bill of materials comes to say a million pounds, it's plus 17%. The standard SLAs are 99.7. If you want greater than 99.7, it's a 50% increase on the net cost. So we've had a lot of clients going, I'm adamant on premise on 99.9, not negotiable. If I can have 5 nines, I have 5 nines. Then I show them the price and they go, 99.7 is actually not so bad. I'm quite happy with that because it gets significant, right? And there are a lot of things that open up. But what I want to do, relevant to the conversation today, is talk about the licensing and cost model changes, right? So what does that actually mean? So what we're talking about here is, in the past, you had your contracts and everything, but what you do when you move to RISE, you in theory end up terminating your perpetual licenses. So you give back that asset and you build a termination clause into that agreement that as you start moving to RISE and you enable, you terminate here and you create credits for yourself based on the support fee you've paid, which then rolls back into a credit against SAP that you can draw down against your subscription services. And you have a subscription in place. Now, what then happens though, is there's all these wonderful things. Full use equivalent. SAP talks about a full use equivalent. Very, very good, very tool. I'll give you a good example about that now, but you need to understand it, right? Because the full use equivalent is tied to t-shirt sizing and infrastructure, and we'll get to that shortly. You're still going to have software engines. SAP's introduced a lot more of what we call derivative pricing. They're a percentage of net, right? So we've seen that in preferred success and those sort of ones, but you're getting more and more and more of those. If you want an RTO of 4 hours, it's 5% more. These are all these things that you're looking for. So, and then you have t-shirt sizing because everything's tied to infrastructure now. Remember, SAP is providing it while you choose your hyperscaler, it's in SAP's instance in that hyperscaler. So you need to understand how those two come together. Now, the reason why we want to talk about today is FUEs and the infrastructure is because those two are intrinsically linked, right? You can't say, I want 150 FUEs, but I need 3 terabytes. You can do that, but you have to build it up, right? They are linked together, right? Because these two are tied, and they also have a separate discount floor than you would for what they call the S4 add-ons. So for example, when you get the FUE, it's like the ECC license. It gives you, professional user gives you professional access, and you can do all of those wonderful things. But if you wanted, for example, anything above the basic ERP, like you wanted advanced closing, for example, or you wanted advanced accounts receivable, that's an extra, that's a different discount, but it's not tied to the floor, which is FUEs and compute. So what I want to do is, and the reason why I want to explain this is, if you understand this, this sets your foundation for your RISE platform. You get this right, the rest of your platform works. And that's why it's so important to focus on FUEs, because they're intrinsically linked with the compute. So let's just give you an example of how FUEs are derived, right? So here's an existing user. They converted to an FUE. Now you don't, when you had ECC and then moved to S4, you could do a contract conversion. You don't do a contract conversion. You're buying net new, and these are terminated. But what they do is they look at it and say, well, how many users do you need, right? So you would have had professional, limited professional, worker users, logistics users, all these ones, right? And they map them to what a new model looks like. And everything is based on the FUE, so one FUE. So for example, if you buy one FUE, that'll get you 1 professional user. It'll get you 5 functional users. Now, functional users like the old logistics users or a warehouse, retail users, those sort of ones. So that's so one FUE will give you 5 of those. One FUE will give you 30 ESS users equivalent, like productivity users, right? Or a half a FUE will get you a developer. So it's two FUEs for a developer, right? But it's important to understand these because obviously if you buy 100 FUEs or 200 FUEs, you can balance them around all you want to, which is great. But you need to know what you're doing because it's very easy to get out of compliance. Because the challenge you have, FUEs are linked to infrastructure. So on the right-hand side, this tells you the t-shirt size. So if you say to SAP, I want X, it automatically gives you a t-shirt size by default. Doesn't change. That's the t-shirt size. Okay. So if you look at, for example, here, the example of 60 to 135 FUE, which is the base level full use equivalent, you only get a prod and you only get a dev environment, and it's only 256 gig. That's it. Then you've got to make that decision of going, shit, do I go higher in FUEs? Do I scale out on infrastructure? What do I do? I need a 3 or a 5-tier architecture. And these are the conversations you've got to get to because each of these adds up as you go, right? So on the right-hand side here, this is the t-shirt sizing that you get and the correlation between that and the FUEs. Now, let's give you a good example here from a client. This is a client example here. So customer requirements on the right-hand side, this was equivalent to their user counts on the right of a 4,010, but based on the FUE mappings, and we'll talk about the FUE mappings properly, and I'll get Simon, he can talk about that as well. The FUE mappings based on what they really need, not how they've given a license today, but what the actual authorizations and usage is. It comes in at 945 licenses that they need, right? Underneath that, it says, well, this is the hardware requirements I need when I go to cloud. I need a production, I need a pre-prod, a QA, quality assurance, a dev, and a DR environment, right? And this is the size because I've got a 4 terabyte environment. So they go, all right, that's the sizing. Now let's use this as an example. So we say, currently need 945, which is a small tier, right? Or if I go to 1,001, I move to a medium tier. So let's have a look at what that looks like. So t-shirt sizing on the right-hand side said, I need 555 to 1,000 FUEs. That's going to give me a small, which is only 512, right? It gives me 3 tiers, but it gives me 512. If I go 1,001, I go to a terabyte. So you got to go, well, which one do I go to? Because also sometimes going up drops you in the next pricing tier because it's buy bulk and save. If you go to the next tier, your price point per unit price comes down. So what we're doing here is, so how do you do that? So if we use this example here of 945, and I'm looking for a 5-tier architecture, what we've got here is that you've got the HANA database sizing and the application server sizing. Now we go and we say, well, first off, I need the users, right? So I need my t-shirt size. I need 945. What that's going to give me on the right-hand side, I'm actually going to move to 1,001 because I want a bigger t-shirt size, right? To the next t-shirt size, I want to go to a terabyte. Now I have to scale out, but then I have to add in, okay, so what am I going to do? Well, I need to scale out memory extensions, and the memory extensions are in 256 gigs. So I need 12 of those. I need 12 for QAS to get my scale out, and I need 3 for dev. So your DR is different because it's priced separately, right? Then you do the same for your application servers and you build that out. And then you build on disaster recovery as well. So all of a sudden, you start going, not only is it that, oh, I thought I was just going to buy this number here, but I need this infrastructure. But if I don't, how do I work the two? So we got a client in Canada, for example, they needed 3,500 FUEs. Genuinely, that's all they needed. Their infrastructure was big, right? So this is a global consumer goods organization. What they did is SAP proposed a bill of materials that basically had 3,500 and then a scale out. So basically this exact working, right? As an example, they scaled that out. What we showed them was actually if they moved to 6,001 FUEs, which you think that doesn't make sense, it actually reduced the number of scale outs and saved them $4 million at list price. So just on one little change. But understanding the FUEs is pivotal to doing this, because what you're doing is, think about it this way, you're building your building blocks for your building. You've got your foundation. If your foundation's in place, your foundation's in place. Your FUEs, once you've signed up, there's no changing FUEs. You can go up, but like anything with SAP, it doesn't come down. So making sure you get it correct is very, very, very important. Okay.
And I think, Doug, if I could just come in on that as well, the big learning point for me was that derivative pricing, that where previously everything was negotiable and you could almost negotiate a net discount across every bill of materials and every single part of SAP product. That's disappeared now because it's not talking about just perpetual licenses for the ability to use the software. When we're talking about the RISE conversations, tying that to what they have to scale out from an infrastructure point of view and how they're, well, pricing in the profit from the outset and scaling that with a very different or non-existent discounting mechanism off the back of it is a big change that I certainly hadn't appreciated until I looked into this in more detail. And I'm sure that a lot of the people on this call wouldn't have done either.
Yeah, I know that's a good point because, you know, the only way to change that is to change the overall pricing of the BOM, right?
Yeah.
Because these are derived based on the net pricing of the bill of materials. They're not discountable. You have to work on the BOM to accurately size your BOM to get a better price point of those bill of materials, to reduce that down to reduce 17% on a lower price point. So exactly. You work on the left-hand side for your discounts because these derivatives they're not discountable, right? So if we have a look here, so it's simple, right? That's easy, right? Now you scale that out across, and the challenge here is, don't care whether you're a small enterprise all the way through the big ones, Challenge is the same, it's just scale, right? But you need to get it right, right? Because this is what we found is we worked with some of the clients that were the early adopters of Rise. So this was going back in January 2021, where contracts were like, literally they said, oh, we're doing Rise. And everyone goes, what the hell is that? Okay, let's make a contract as we go. The contracts were like 90 pages long. They just threw shit in everywhere to make it work and get what it was. Now it's down to very easy, 16 pages. There's the contracts, there's the terms. We're not flexible, we're not flexible, we're not flexible. One thing you'll find is what they will not do is more than what they would normally do. And what I mean by that is in the perpetual world, sure, we'll do whatever. It's all about margin. Now, have you ever heard an SAP sales rep worry about margin? Never, right? In the cloud, it's all about margin. For example, they work on the rule of 7. So 7 times your current maintenance cost needs to be covered in that agreement, right? It's got to cover 7 times. If the deal is less than that, they won't approve it. So there's all these things you've got to worry about. But now, how do you work out your FUEs? So earlier on, we asked you the poll about the STAR report. So for those who are not sure what that is, it's SAP's HANA Trusted Authorization Report, right? Review. It is basically the object analyzer report. So the SAP will say, you know, run the STAR report, give it to us, and we'll be able to tell you how many FUEs you need. And everyone goes, great, fantastic. Let's do that. So we go, that's awesome. Let's run that. Here we go. But hang on a second. This is showing that everyone's now professional users because it always takes you to the high level based on the authorizations. And you go, but hang on, my last audit where I gave my USMM and my SLAW report, I was compliant. Yeah, but that's how you've allocated users. This is based on authorizations and use. So now what you've basically done is you've just shown SAP that if they physically audit you, because they're starting to use the object analyzer in audits now, they'll look at that and go, yeah, you had 69. We had one client had 69 professional users and I think about 3,500 limited professional users. Everything became a professional user. All right, jumped to £4.5 million, right, as an exposure point, as an example. We fixed it, but you know it's harder to fix after the fact once they've seen the evidence. Right? You can always fix it before and build a story around it when you share that data and say, if we go on that journey, it's going to be part of my transformation program, but it's how you handle that, right? And then SAP says, yeah, but it's based on authorizations. Then the oh shit moment comes because 2 things happen. Number 1, either you've created a compliance issue or what you have done is you've also created the wrong sizing for your FUEs. So you're going to potentially be oversized because everything defaults to a higher rating. So it comes back to your security profiles and your roles and everything that need to be addressed, right? You can do a quick Band-Aid initially, but you still got to fix the problem because it'll come back, all right? So 2 things happen. One is if you're going to go forward with Rise, you're going to be at a much higher FUE than you actually need. And remember, you can't roll back the FUEs once you bought them. They're not part of a remix or anything. That's number 1. If you decide not to go, if anybody's seen with SAP how great they've been at the moment with their discounts on their perpetual licensing, it's virtually non-existent now, right? Because they don't care.
Mm-hmm.
Sales reps will get paid pence in the pound for commission. That's it. They don't care, right? So what happens then is, oh dear me, well that's £1.5 million. You have to settle that because we've now seen you're non-compliant. But boy, if you do cloud, I can give you a 90% discount on that, or we can clean it up in the move, right? So it's very, very, very. I keep stressing it. And because it's the thing that catches people out, not only now, but as you move forward, once you're online and you're in the cloud, remember your audits today are, you've got everything yourself and you let SAP in, as in I'll run the report for you, SAP. When you're in the cloud, they can look at it all the time. And that you're basically compliance is ongoing. The Glass team for SAP are constantly building out new reporting to monitor consumption so that they can see exactly where you're over or under, and they'll use that. Okay, we know because we've got a couple of people that we know that are friends of ours that are in there and they're going, we're building this stuff ongoing, right? So that's how you need to make sure you get it right. So with that, how do you do that, right? How do you create the leverage? And with that, I want to hand it back over to Simon because we can talk about everything from the licensing and everything, but physically, how do you address this? That's why we work very closely with Turnkey. So I want to hand it back to Simon. And Simon, you can take the team through what that actually looks like from your perspective.
Fantastic. Yeah, thanks, Doug. I mean, for me, your last point was the great one, where we're looking at SAP having got you over a barrel, either with the compliance issue or the opportunity to transform you into that Rise contract. But one of the things that I think we wanted to focus on here is just recognizing where we can help and where it's it's not quite as easy. So a lot of the focus now really is on the FUE side of things and how we can start to play with the items on the left, as Doug put it. The sizing in the infrastructure largely takes care of itself as a consequence of getting the basics right and the previous bits right. And what I wanted to do is really to say that it doesn't matter where you are on that journey. If you've at the start, brilliant. That's amazing. We can add a huge amount of value to you, and we can really help to navigate you through those shark infested waters. If you're midway through, then of course we've got the opportunity to really help you and protect you from what's yet to come. And we can also help you to realize those target benefits as well. But even if we're coming at it a little bit too late and you've already made a lot of those kind of questions, then there's still something that we can do as well. But beforehand, obviously you get the greatest of all worlds. During, a little bit less, and afterwards we'll come into that. But what we're really looking to do here is do exactly what Doug said: protect you from perhaps yourselves, but definitely from SAP, to give you the control, bring your own data back into your hands so that you can have the right level of enlightened negotiations with SAP and take control both of your implementation approach, but also the bill of materials that you really need to drive that foundation forward. So what that looks like is really starting with an assessment, starting with identifying the target, where you can get to in terms of an FUE count. We use that to help with the contractual side of things, but down below the line, we also need to prove to SAP that that's actually what we're going after. So we need to close those gaps. We need to remediate it, because it's all very well saying we project forward that we can forecast this amount of FUEs. If we don't ever get there, then we're achieving nothing. As Doug's rightly said, they're building out the compliance reporting, they're looking at the operational usages, and they're able to monitor based upon the authorizations and entitlements held by the users. So we need to get that off of the user base so that we can demonstrate the actual remediation of the concerns and the gaps. Once we move into the after effects of it, then actually we need to keep that on the straight and narrow. It's not a one and done scenario. Wouldn't it be lovely if we were in a perpetual world that we've already bought these are ours for life, and we never have to come back and revisit it? That's not the cloud world. We're signing up to term agreements, we're signing up to different transitional agreements that will go through, and there's a renewal to happen. And it's only a matter of time before SAP really get on that bandwagon and understand that renewals and client protection of revenues is really the important thing there. If there's an opportunity to surge price the renewals and go up to a higher level of FUE count and all of the cyber sizing and the derivative pricing, they're going to do that. So we need to have the continuous operations in place, which involves proper access governance controls and being able to understand exactly what our going in position is from the future negotiation standpoints. So it's not a one and done. This is a repetitive and a permanent focus that we need to look at from a compliance point of view, but more importantly, business effectiveness and business operations point of view as well. So that's the real message that we need to get to here. So as I said, timing is everything. We've got the opportunity now to help you to take control of this situation, give you a whole army of people that are seasoned campaigners in beating up SAP, particularly in Doug's world. He's been involved in so many of the different contractual negotiations, and some of the stories that we've been hearing already today, he's got hundreds more where he can show exactly what's happened. And if we can go through that and we can start that engagement process early on, we can realize all of the benefits of an enhanced knowledge of the FUE baseline and the add-on savings that we can pack into from a sizing and infrastructure point of view. We can also help to make that right decision about whether RISE is the correct one for you, or whether actually going to somewhere else as a hyperscaler, bearing in mind it's just managed services. We can help with that sort of decision as well. But we can't do that as well if you've already given the keys to the kingdom to SAP and they know what you're shooting for. As soon as that STAR report, that object analyzer report, goes over to SAP, they already know where your negotiating position starts and finishes. because they've already got the offset of the compliance issues that they can talk about. They can already see exactly what you're in for, and it becomes, how can we get as close to that maximum as possible because of the leverage that they have already got over you.
Can I just
So
jump in on that one, Simon? Because
yeah.
we're working with the turnkey guys in Australia as well, and one of those clients was SAP had seen their number, right? And the number came in at 1,256, I think it was,
Mhm.
FUEs. And SAP was like, "Oh, this is wonderful. This is fantastic." Now the client did have plans, but what we did is it's a lot harder, but you can do it. But you've got to roll back
Yeah.
and say, "Okay, guys, yes, but look, we know it's going to get cleaned up, guys. As part of the transformation, we're working with Turnkey to get it all sorted. This is the plan. We actually only need 680, and our goal is over the next 12 months during the transformation, during the brownfield, we will get to 680. If we go over, that's a different story.
Yeah.
But we're going to buy 1,001 because they're buying for growth, because they're probably going to buy somebody. And if they come in, at least that gives them some buffer. But it's all
Yeah.
in managing the story with SAP as well. Now, if you do it before, and if you find stuff, and even if we find now working with Turnkey and we find stuff with you that goes, there's a bit of a cleanup, but I want to move forward, it's in the message that you give SAP, because you don't want them going, well, here it is. You go, well, I actually need the following, or it's worse if you want less FUEs and you're a lot higher. But if you're, but it's just getting the messaging right. So the more you can do exactly like Simon's saying earlier on, the easier it is to control the script and the messaging with SAP and control the sales cycle and the balance of power for our clients. Right.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. And we've been talking with some clients here in the UK, and exactly the same story, where we can help to message it correctly. We can help to get the right balance, because I think we've already alluded to the fact that there's multiple sources of value that SAP can bring into the deal to sweeten it or appear to. And so overbuying some of the FUE counts that you don't necessarily need may give you access to strategic transformation funds, some other different rebates or other things there. But you need to know what you're shooting for and what's important for you, whether you want to pay more in the OPEX side of things from a contractual point of view and less on the CapEx side, or whatever. But again, every deal is somewhat unique, even though SAP are trying to standardize as much as they possibly can on a SaaS model, because that's where the margin and the value comes in from their revenues. Now, the after bucket, we do kind of take a little bit of a liberty and say this is more like the mop and bucket exercise, because all the cash has walked out of the door. So you've got the bare residuals left we can clean up what we can with what we've got. But we're looking at the dregs of the soap suds to try and clean up the mess after all of the rest of the budget's been spent already. That doesn't mean to say that you can't still add value. So as we mentioned before, we've got the operational and the monitoring capabilities. Our Bedrock's managed services can really do a great job in keeping the focus on the entitlements and the authorizations assigned, because it's not a one and done. This exercise will happen again. And the worst of all scenarios would be that you've bought the FUE count that you thought that you needed, but then you're permanently on those add-ons and you're adding more and more and more because you cannot keep control of the authorizations that are assigned to your end users and or your business professionals within the bandwidths of what you've bought already. So huge amounts of value to still be had. It's just that we can't help you get the right deal at the outset. Until next time. So looking at that as a return on investment, how do we do it in the initial phases? Well, relatively targetedly. The first phase, having just said, don't give up your star report to SAP, is absolutely give your star report up to us. So we know that that's a disingenuous type message, but if we're on your side, we can help you and protect you between the SAP overlords and what you need from your business. So we do need to have a look at that. We need to see where you're exposed, and then we need to hopefully be able to fix those gaps very, very quickly. We've already rolled that into a lot of our enablements and all of our accelerators from a consulting point of view. So we've got it in our access risk rule sets, we've got it in the capabilities of tooling, and we know where to look for to find out that information and get you that real quick gap assessment. From there on in, it's a remediation point of view. We don't just want to do remediation from an FUE count. We want to do remediation for the right reasons as well. So that goes back to the business outcome, recognizing the value of security, doing it right. This is not just a paper exercise to try and save you money. It will, but we want to right size those entitlements for your business needs. It's pointless taking away all of the entitlements just to make an arbitrary license count if it derails and disrupts your business in the operational sense. So we need to get that right, and that does need to be targeted at the right areas. At that point, we can present the proper figures for how we're projecting this, and we can message that in a coherent manner to SAP so it can maximize the value that you get. And within that, that's when you start getting all of the additional bolt-on values that Doug's already mentioned in terms of the sizing, the infrastructure, and or the options to really deploy it in the way that you should. Now, I'm going to guess that some people have already asked a lot of questions about what does this actually mean. I can see that we've got about 16 questions there, so I'm going to say from the outset, we're not going to be able to answer all of them. But one of the key questions is, how much am I likely to save? And again, this is an example. I'm not guaranteeing that we're going to give you north of 50% reductions on your licenses. I'd love to be able to guarantee that, but that would be a ridiculous thing to say. But this does speak to the sorts of savings that we've been able to achieve. And it also points us to where those opportunities are to evidence it. Now you see on the left-hand side of the slide, we've got the advanced users. Those were the sort of professional ones in the old case. Those were the real kind of all functionality, real key support type areas where we need to actually get the developers and the AMS and everything else sorted out. We don't often see a huge reduction in that space because those are the fewer protected FUEs or enlightened advanced users that would normally be in any kind of system. But what we do see are those functional roles, the ones that are modular specific, the ones that will be doing financial transactions and processing a lot more of the traditional SAP user accounts. And in that scenario, that's where we see a massive opportunity to swing to the right. You can see that those bar lines have been pretty much reversed, where we can move it from the core user into the self-service user and really make that case. That's where we're seeing the savings coming from in the traditional FUE plots. So there is logic to it, and more often than not, we are seeing significant reductions in terms of the FUE count. It doesn't mean you're going to buy fewer, as we've already mentioned, but at least you're buying it for the right reasons and you know why. So the promises of what we are looking to provide. We are trying to reduce down the number of FUEs, and we're looking at in the order of about 50% as where we've seen it before. It's not always going to happen like that, but that's exactly where we're striving to get you to. What that does mean is that there should be a direct reduction in the FUE targets that you're going for and the associated derivative pricing based upon that. So doesn't automatically mean that you will buy fewer, but you're buying it for the right reasons. By doing that, we're also able to start talking about process efficiency and the inherent compliance risk reductions. As I mentioned on the previous slides, we're looking to do remediation, not just to fit an arbitrary contractual compelling event, but we're also looking to reduce down that level of over-provisioning in general and correcting some of the errors of the past, which has left you traditionally exposed to audit risks, compliant risks, and all of the other things there that drive process inefficiencies. The ultimate game is to really right-size this experience to your business end users. And that's often the hardest thing to substantiate, but the biggest value driver in any sort of security and implementation. If we can get that security aligned with your business growth ambitions and the opportunities to link that back to business performance, that's where we're going to see the right values. That's where we're going to see security done as the right thing for the right reasons and build it into an enabler for growth. You'll be able to take more risks by harnessing those opportunities, putting the guardrails in so that things can go the way that you want them to do and not the way that you don't. So reducing risk to drive business performance, align security into your business goals, and create that streamlined user experience for how they use these SAP tools for now and into the future. It's quite a lot to take in from a licensing point of view, hey? So
Well, you can
always
see that
love,
by the number of questions that have come through, right?
well, yeah, exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
So always love to finish with an external perspective. And we've got Gerald here, who's been very happy to provide a quote. And I'm sure you can all read it yourself. But what we've been able to do with that is to really improve the stakeholder management, provide the right information to the right people, and being able to protect our clients from those unforeseen disasters that come from dealing with a compelling event as complicated as this one is. So spending a few minutes on those tables that Doug showed earlier on just highlights that this is not something that most organizations are enabled and equipped to do themselves. More often than not, they need some sort of help. And we've been able to help the likes of Gerald's organization here to be able to unlock some of those business value drivers through doing this in the right and coherent manner. Before we go into the questions, a quick plug. We've had a whistle-stop tour through this. This was meant to be an introduction to the topic, and hopefully you've managed to get some tangible outcomes from this alone. But if you'd like to explore further, we are both at the UK ISUG event later in the year. On the 1st of December, we've actually got 2.5 hours dedicated to this topic on its own. We're going to be deep diving into this in, well, more depth, trying to work through some more examples and being able to bring forth those war stories and give you as much information as possible within that period of time. But we want to try and make that into an interactive session. But rather than it being just a repeat of this in a presentation, we want to try and get through your problems. So it would help us massively if you can come to that session enabled with the key figures and the key information that would help us to help you to target that message and really give you some tangible advice as to how to go forward.
Yeah, just adding to that one. So one of the things we talk about is license around authorization. Bring all your licensing questions. Right. So I love curly questions. And if I look at some of the questions that are in the Q&A here as well, there's some really good questions here that we can dive deep into as well. Because the key thing, obviously, this was just a snippet. There are so many things when it comes to RISE and the contracts and all that sort of stuff that you've got to be understanding. I mean, there's some great comments in here that, SAP's, when we look at one of the comments is, in monitoring of SAP RISE, 100%, right? It's still new. No matter what SAP tells you, this is still a baby, right? So they're still trying to work on things, need to understand. There's a lot of things they say they will do, but you've got to read the fine print. There's still a lot of things you have to do as well. There's a lot of stuff and you've got to do a lot of monitoring as well. We've got a lot of clients that are coming up, the early ones that started in 2021 that have got renewals. So what does that mean? One of the questions in here was also, what happens about a renewal time? Can I renegotiate? What can I do? Right. There's another one further down talking about, do I renegotiate FUEs? So yes, there is. We've done a couple that have come up now as well. And if you saw the early contracts compared to the new ones now, there absolutely is an opportunity, because if you've got the earlier contracts, you can drive a tank through those ones. And that's great, right? Because the earlier ones were, the more they patched them together, the more gaps you've got that you can work with when a renegotiation. When you come to someone who's got a new contract, say, for example, someone who signed up this year and in 3 years' time comes through, you can renegotiate, but it's better to build a lot of terms in to protect you up front, like exit pricing, all these sort of things, to cap these sort of things with you. The ability to, we call it rebalance, that you build into your contracts, so that if I'm going through my program and I realize that I bought X of this and Y of that, but I'm not actually using as much, but I need more here, rather than spending, how do I it's like the old remix in perpetual, but it's a rebalance rights in the cloud. So you got to have, how do you look at some of those as well? So we work with clients on their renewals. So we've done quite a few renewals now. There's 7 of those so far. And that doesn't sound like a lot, but those are early adopters, right? And so what we've done is we've done 7 of those, and they get very interesting, because how do you manage that as well? So bring us those. We'll cover that. There's a lot in here. And then if we don't cover it, I'm going to be there the whole time as well. So if you want to get time anytime, we can just sit there and brainstorm on your stuff. How I operate is, if I can help you and it gives you some insights and you get from that and you're comfortable, that's fantastic. If you want more help, happy to help you. But if you just want to pick my brain for a couple of questions and that's enough, I'm good with that as well. All right.
Yeah, absolutely right.
Should we jump into some of the questions, Simon? Because there's some really good ones on here.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
And one of the ones that's come up repeatedly is people heeding the warning signs about, oh my goodness, what if I've already sent the star report to SAP? What do I do now? Or
Yeah.
what can I do? So do you want to take that one, Doug? I
Yeah,
think
yeah. So it's all in the messaging, right? So like
yeah.
we said, so you can still frame the messaging correctly. You can give it to them, and then they'll come back and say, oh, well, based on this, this is what your FUE would look like. You need to reconcile that to based on what your usage should actually be, right?
Mm,
So remember that the star report or the object analyzer report goes and brings out the data based on the authorizations, right? And then it gets sent to them. They will look at that and go, this is what it looks like. Now they still in, I call it happy sales mode. They don't want to scare you. They want to go, oh, this is what it's going to look like. It's going to look like this much FUE. It's not a problem. You need to do your due diligence, bring it back and go, well, what does that actually look like based on the authorizations? It's X of this, Y of this, Y of the other. Does that align to what I actually should be using? And then you can come back. And if you need to do changes, you can do those changes. And you go back to them and say, look, that's based on that. The authorizations, we are working on an authorization cleanup. This is what it looks like. But if they see that you're committed to that journey, they're a lot more flexible in that lot. So the world isn't over. It's just you need to make sure you do your due diligence by bringing it back in, and then you frame your messaging correctly. And yes, you can all run the object analyzer report. The star report is when you export it to them, but
mm.
basically the object analyzer is there. You can actually get it at a summary level, and you can see that yourself in the screens, and you can see the summaries. So you can actually see that. But as soon as you export it, it gets encrypted. The turnkey guys know how to use that, but it
Yep.
gets encrypted and it goes to SAP. But the turnkey guys can actually take that data from the object analyzer and interpret it for you as well.
Fantastic. Fantastic. So yeah, we've had a few people who are saying, how do we run it and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, we can follow up on that anyway. So another question, how close to the beginning of an S4 project should this activity be completed?
So there's two things that you look at when you start on a journey for S4, right? So one is you're doing your own phase zero, which is what are my requirements? What am I, am I going to do transformation? Am I going to do just brownfield? What are my requirements, my processes, and all that sort of stuff? So you kind of do a phase zero. You run that in parallel because also some of
Mm,
those that you're doing might change the licensing constructs that you want to go with. So typically you would start this, the earlier, the better. And I know it sounds weird but it's the thing that you've got is you're going to have the relationship with the SI to put it in, but you're going to have a 3, 5, or 7 year contract with SAP. And you need to get that contract right. And you need to take the time to do that because SAP is going to pad it out and make it look really, really good. But you need to pull it back. Like one of the things we look at is how do you ramp up, right? So for example, in year 1, you're in project mode. So your FUEs, if I need 1,000 FUEs, I don't want 1,000 FUEs from day one. I want to ramp it up. And how do I ramp it up? And I tier it through. So these are all the things that you've got to build in. So in theory, what happens, SAP says that year 1, because it's project year, can be up to, they say 50, we've got it to 25% of year 2, right? So if you're 1,000, we've got it to 250 that you pay. Now, in the total contract value, it's there, but in year 1, at least your costs are a lot lower and they're aligned more to the value realization of the project because you're not getting value yet, right? So the more of this you can plan up front, you build into your contract, you understand that, then you have the phase zero stuff feeding in that then says, okay, how does that then update or reflect in a contract with SAP from a usage point of view, from a licensing point of view, from a terms and conditions point of view, and that's what you then work with SAP on.
So I'd just like to add on to that one as well, that throughout all of time, we've seen security and controls being moved to the right in a project plan. The focus is always on functionality. Let's get the functionality in, let's make it work. And security is often an afterthought. And it's borne out by the hundreds of queued tickets at go live when they think, oh, you actually want people to use this stuff. Oh, well, we need to do some mapping to put this on. I think the FUE importance actually really shines a torchlight on the fact that if you don't move a lot of the security and controls aspects to the left, then you will have no idea about what you're exposing yourself to later on in the program. So the return on investment case is there to reduce down your potential license exposures and your contractual obligations, but you also get a huge amount more value by moving all of the security and controls elements into the prerequisites for functional deployment. That way you avoid audit fees later on, you avoid all sorts of rework and remediation effort because you're planning to do it right first time. And it's probably not the right thing to say working for turnkey, but we'd much rather spend a lot less of your money with us by right sizing your security from the outset than charging you twice the price to retrofit it and remediate. But that's exactly the scenario that we see, that access remediation projects, regardless of the need and the requirement, take a lot more effort because we're having to disrupt business operations and take away access that should never been there in the first place. This gives us the compelling reason for why to do that right first time.
Yeah, yeah. So let me just jump on. I'm just aware of the time here. So I've just got
Yep.
two in here that I just wanted to bring up as well quickly, right? So what happens after the initial contract term with Rise? Can we renegotiate terms? Yes and no, right? And what I mean by that is there are some things that you can do and some things that you can't do. So typically commercial terms, unless it's introducing a new product, it's called expansion, and expansion typically is locked in, right? But can you renegotiate if you are evolving that BOM, and if the BOM changes in a positive way? There are ways to do it. It depends on what you're trying to achieve. We have done it where we've changed terms because the older contracts weren't as specific. So we actually introduced new terms in there. So you can do that. I know it sounds like a consulting answer and it's not meant to be, but it depends on what you're trying to achieve, right? So the big thing that you're trying to do is protect exit. So what we mean, there was another question about, there was one that was also raised, which it said here, our current offer contains a final FUE doubling to give us a better, lower price per user over a 5-year term and to enable us to access bigger infrastructure landscape. Should be worried about that. And also what happens at year 5. So everything is about your exit. All right. So when you look at it, it's a 3, 5, or 7-year agreement. At the time of exit, what you want to do is you want to make sure that if when you're exiting, you've capped what that exit value is going to be so that it can actually mitigate as much uplift as possible at the end of that term. Right. So what you're going to look at here is to get the lower price point and the FUEs and the compute, you need to understand what that will look like. Because sometimes the one example I gave of the CPG company, they jumped 2 price tiers, but their infrastructure was so big that actually the scale out, because they still, even after archiving the crap out of it, they still needed 9 terabytes, right? Now, if you think about 9 terabytes, the biggest you can get is a 6 terabyte box. That's the biggest you can get, right? And then it's scale out. So it actually worked out that scale out, and because it's infrastructure, it only has a certain discount level it can go to, because they still have to pay the hyperscaler, and SAP still has to make 30% margin on compute, right? So what happens there is that actually limited the compute discount. Okay, so then all of a sudden it actually ends up being cheaper to go to the higher FUEs. You just need to understand what you're trying to achieve, and then what's your infrastructure you need, and then compare the cost models. And we can work with you to help you determine what those cost models and what's going to be the best commercial one. Because 2 things you want is you want it in there, you want it done correctly, but you also want it most efficiently from a cost point of view. But also you don't want to have a whole load of scale outs, because then you've got 12 SKUs that are all going to be attached to this thing because I need extra storage, I need extra these things. It gets harder to manage. And one of the earlier points was managing and monitoring 100%, right? And SAP are investing in it. So at the moment, for example, if you want to do a license review, you can still do a license review like the old way, like you do on your ECC, because it's a managed service, it's a private cloud, right? So you still do SLAW reports, business object reports, USMM. They are reducing the USMM now. If you see the latest updates, the USMM is getting smaller. Payroll's taken out now, right? It's because they're going to start looking. Payroll was always just included in USM and it was kind of a given. It's been removed now because they're starting to monitor payroll. They're starting to look at all these sort of things more and more closely. So when you look at it, when we have the event, if anybody's coming to that event, we can discuss these things in more detail. So bring some of these challenges and I can talk you through. We only really spoke about FUE here, but if you want to talk about anything across the licensing spectrum to do with RISE, absolutely, we can cover it. If you're not going and you want to reach out, my details are in here as well. Happy to take a call and walk you through some of that as well.
Absolutely.
Did you have anyone from your side, Simon?
No, I think the main thing for me was just one of the questions there about what would we need to bring to that event on the 1st of December at 2:30 p.m. And for me, I think it is just what Doug said. Bring forward the planned usage, the FUE counts, the star report information, just the basics about what licensing you've currently got, and an idea, if you have one, about what your prospective go forward journey looks like in terms of big box, medium box, small boxes, numbers of FUEs, and what the scope and scale of your environment is.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we can talk for hours,
Can I
as you
just
might
check?
be
There
able
was
to
one
tell.
more quickly. I just want to answer quickly, just before we go, if that's okay.
We are at time, I'm
Okay.
afraid.
All
So
right.
we are going to be shut out. But
Yeah.
if you've got any further questions that we haven't answered online, we will follow up and we will get back to you on them. But if you enjoyed that, then please do come and see us on the 1st of December, and we'll be more than happy to reach out in the meantime for any of the other questions that we didn't get covered. But thank you very much for joining, and we look forward to seeing you on the other side.